looking at today. This is the second chapter, chapter 2 of Political Economy by John Eaton, an old Marxist text on political economy. Also, I think it's important that we really struggle with this issue of political economy, because most of us are not familiar with it. Most of us just know we don't ever have enough money, and that we go to the store with the assumption of being able to purchase this or buy that, or if we can't buy it, or money for us is just always a critical question. But most of us never ask the question of the origin of money, where it comes from. How does somebody, we go to work, we try to make a living, even how it is questions of factoring into how do I make this much money? What is it that gives my labor this amount of value as compared to Uhuru? You're on, Louise.
I'm going to get to because I was seeing my phone. I'm going to get
What did you say? Now, is that it, Louise? Oh, he's already gone. Okay. Okay. So should I Skype him in or what?
I will.
Okay. This question of money, of economics, is not something that we ever pay that much attention to. Not as economics, not as with the assumption that there's some kind of science that could possibly be associated with this thing. We know there are banks and financial institutions. We have some, and many people in our community don't even have a relationship to banks. We borrow money from these gouging entities, these other super predatory gouging entities, where we borrow money off our paychecks. We borrow money, from day to day, that we pay exorbitant amount of interest, that thing. But just in terms of money, the nature of the economy, where it comes from, this is not something that most of us generally think about. Hell, the relationship we have with white people, white power, the more advanced of us, with the relationship we have with America, Europeans, that kind of thing. But when you start talking about making ultimate changes, like revolutionary transformation, to change our relationship to income, the amount that what we need in order to survive, to even make a decision that if you live in a community, that there ought to be the ability to, in that community, to get what you need, to eat, clothing that you need. And there's this strange thing that happens to us that's no longer strange, because it's been with us for as long as we can remember, that everything that it takes to live and survive, we have to get it from another community. Go to the white community, to shop. There's things that they call shops in our community. The food is rotten and lousy. And so let's talk about this. Let's look at this whole question of political economy, economics. That's what this is all about. It's not good enough just to be power and all of the stuff that the white man does that's wrong to us, that we have to be talking about understanding that we have to create a new world and an ability to feed, clothe, house ourselves. And how does that factor into this whole situation? How does the poverty of Black people here and around the world, how does that come into existence? Why are we so poor? These are really fundamental kinds of questions that we have to grapple with, and they're not the kind of romantic, the occasional trip to Africa to see the pyramids that some Negroes are involved in, or even, like the demonstrations that you can have in the streets. It's not good enough even to have universities that's going to teach Black history and all of this. How the hell are we going to live? You can't eat history. You can't wear it. What do we have to do to take control of our lives? And our lives, like in every society, is organized around the question of producing and reproducing life itself. That's the ongoing thing that human beings have to do. That's the fundamental question that every society has to deal with in order to continue to exist, the production and reproduction of real life. There's no God, there's no religion, there's no culture, there's no melanin, there's nothing without life. If you don't have life, you have nothing. Therefore, the primary motivating factor in all society is the production and reproduction of life itself, human life. And that sets the terms for everything else that's going to happen for it to happen. That's a materialist understanding things, as opposed to some kind of idealist or religious thing. You got to be alive for anything else to happen. And that is a powerful statement about the question of political economy, because it is through political economy, through the economy, that we organize ourselves to stay alive, to have food to eat, place, shelter from the elements, clothing to wear, etc. We want to talk about this, and we're using this text by John Eaton. This is an old text written in 1949, but it really doesn't matter. It could have been written yesterday. The basic fundamental premise of much of it is flawed, and it's flawed precisely because it all stems from a European perspective, from a European history, from a European relationship to the world. And that relationship that Europe and Europeans have to the world is something that they have achieved at the expense of everybody else. Sister Yeshitela and I, Sister Yeshitela participated in an interview that I sat in on a day or two ago. And it became really frustrating for me and very difficult for me to be in that discussion and many others that we have with white people and middle-class Negroes, because the premise of their discussion is always that white is the norm. White is the norm. They don't have to say it. But the premise always is that white is the norm. So if somebody's not living up to white standards or like white people, then there's something defective about us. So they would take somebody who they have enslaved and put in certain kinds of circumstances, robbed from an obvious relationship to our own culture, robbed of our capacity to feed, clothe, and house ourselves, and put under a terrible, horrible, brutal, vicious, anti-human white nationalist control, and then say, well, why do you act the way you act? And then say things like the woman talked about interviewing Yeshitela, talked about Dominique, and she's been in trouble, et cetera, et cetera. Hell, the whole African nation is in trouble. That's the reality. We're all in trouble. That's what being black in this world is, being in trouble. And we've been in trouble since we met y'all. You understand? The person who's asking the question, we were cool before we met you and your relatives, but now we're in trouble. But you asked the question of Yeshitela, is there anything that she could have done differently? The assumption is that Dominique has turned out badly. So is there anything that she could have done differently so that Dominique would have been a better person or a good person or wouldn't have been in trouble and this kind of stuff? And that of course, this is what we're looking at. When we look at this, when we look at white people talking from a white experience, white expectations, they set themselves up as the template for everything that is positive, good, meaningful in the world, and everybody else has to have some kind of relationship to that. So that's the problem with this book. That's the problem with what much of Karl Marx has written. And this book is based on a Marxist interpretation of a history of political economy, etc. Now, I'm using this because I do think there's some value in it. I think one of the things that's valuable about it is that it attempts to treat the question of political economy in a scientific way. And that's something that we have to struggle for. We really, really, really have to struggle for science, because otherwise everything is mysterious. Everything just sort of happens in the world based on prayer, based on whether you're being treated good by the gods, or whether your horoscope reads right, or whether you got the right brand of reefer when you do this or that. It's just all these other things. And I'm saying that there's a science that's there. Just like when you go out and a particular season, if you want to grow food, you know that you have to till the land. You have to then put the seed in a certain time. You don't put the thing grow anytime. You put it there a certain time, because there's a science to it. And I'm saying that there's a science to society itself. There's a science to economy, and that's what we're looking at and looking for. So just because something is scientific does not mean it's right. But the thing is that it's possible to prove that it's right or that it's wrong. If it's not scientific, then you're in like an argument with someone who you can't argue, because you can't prove it one way or the other. For example, in the beginning, there was the word was God. Okay, there's no way I can prove that. I can't check that up. There's nothing I can do to check that up, but I can prove some things. 9 months later, the child was born because something happened to make that occur. And pretty soon, human beings on Earth figure out that, hell, we did this 9 months ago, and every time we do this, 9 months later, this happens. So you can achieve some kind of scientific approach to that, right? And which is why the great mystery that they call a miracle of Jesus, because Joe, are you sure? You know what I mean? I mean, 9 months later, you gotta be. There's some science to it. You can come up with an explanation, and that's what we're looking for now. So here's what I want to start off by saying this. I'm going to give just a basic rundown on the Marxist theory that this is founded. This book we're reading from, the Marxist theory of the development of human society, begins with thousands of years ago. Human beings lived in a state of equality, no oppression. Men did not oppress women. You did not have people exploiting other people for their labor value and stuff like that. People lived in a state of equality. Just have as a time of primitive communism. Primitive in this sense meaning the beginning, early, the starting communism. Or it's sometimes referred to as primitive communalism. And then according to the Marxist theory, that is based on historical materialism. Let's just say, try to understand the world like we as materialists, based on an investigation of the world. If I want to understand the Bible, I study what? If I want to understand the world, I study the world. So when I want to find out about the world, I don't go to the Bible. I look at the world. I investigate the world, that reality. That's a materialist way of looking at things. And so they make this assumption that the earliest human society begins with human beings living in common, that there's no basic contradiction inside the society itself. Contradiction that exists between human beings, like how to have shelter, how to have food. And these are the basic kinds of contradictions that humans are involved in. And then according to the Marxist assumption, humans, and that the division of labor was essentially that between men and women. Like men would go out, hunt, do all this other kind of stuff, and women would usually tend the children, tend the home, food, they're at the house. This was the basic division of labor. And then, according to the Marxists, at a certain time in this human society, then humans stop having to rely just on what happened with the hunt. Man go out hunt animals. Sometimes a good day, sometimes a bad day. Sometimes we gotta go hungry because we didn't capture anything, and the only to eat was what might have been done by woman at terms of food might have been grown. But even then, much of what happened was humans had to follow the seasons, follow from place to place to see what was growing. As we move forward, then instead of killing an animal, humans began to capture that animal and then began to breed that animal, right? And so now you have livestock. And then instead of just following the sea, humans began to do where we were located. According to the Marxist theory, for the first time in human society, they developed a surplus. And by surplus, more than what is necessary to exist. The Marxist theory is that the reason there was equality was because of scarcity, because there was so that was the basis for equality. That doesn't make sense to me, because anytime you look around the world today, you see that scarcity is where you see violence and huge struggles, competition for resources and stuff like that, and not equality. But here's the Marxist theory, that because now for the first time, right, because we're growing animals that we can milk, we got animals we can kill for the flesh, we can skin them for their to make our clothing, etc. And this for the first time in society, according to the Marxists, this surplus. Now there's a new problem that existence comes into being in society, because once there's a surplus, the question arises of who is going to control the surplus. If you got more than you need, then the question is, who controls that? And so out of this situation, there emerges forces who didn't exist before in society. In society, and what they like to call in primitive and other kinds of societies, there existed the prestige of the elders, people who had profound influence, not just by virtue of being old, but by virtue of being old and collecting wisdom and knowing things that other younger people didn't know, having the history of the whole society in their brains, griots and stuff like that can tell you the whole history going back for hundreds of years. I mean, these people were highly respected, right? They weren't elected to office or anything like that, and it didn't have a police, and you can't even find a history of jails going back to those kind of times. And in Africa, you don't find a history of jails in Africa before the white man got there. And so because you got this surplus, the surplus as his own. In order to maintain that, he has to have a capacity. You got to have a bigger stick than anybody else. You got to have 3 or 4 people with sticks. You got to be able to grow a capacity, and this capacity that emerges in society now is the state. And now everybody who wants the ability to eat, they have to go through the people who control everything. And this is where they find the emergence of slavery in human society, according to the Marxists. So now the human beings become owned in Europe, and this is true in Europe. You look at Greece, like people like to talk about ancient Greece, and this is where the word democracy comes from, Greece, ancient Greece, and what have you. But what they don't say is that in ancient Greece, 80% of the population was slaves. 80% of the people were free in this great Greek democracy. And so you had slave societies there. You had the Roman society, slave society, and these are societies that Europeans hold up and highly. They really enduring, and they're great evidence of of European civilization, Greek and Roman society, and all of them were based on slavery. So you had this huge population of people who were enslaved, with a handful of people who were better off than everybody expense of the slaves. This is how slavery comes into existence. Initially, you had a situation that they refer to as primitive communism or primitive communalism, and then everybody was equal, no oppression, no exploitation, no oppression of women. And then there emerges this thing, slavery, as a consequence of a surplus and a new social force now, who is the slave owner. Slave owner comes into existence, and the two primary contradictions in society is the slave owner and those who are enslaved. We got these two contendings existing in society, whereas before there was none. There was equality, according to the Marxist theory. And of course, slavery, and of course, under slavery, the production, we're still in the process of producing life. That still has to happen. But the production now is not happen as it's different from under primitive participated in the hunt. Everybody participated in eating everything, you know, etc. It was collective. Now, situation where the slave master owns and controls everything, including the human beings, and the masses of people produce, and they don't keep anything they produce. All of it goes to the slave owners. It is really something that's kind of shaky proposition. For one thing, there is no incentive for the person who is enslaved to work. Why the hell should I work when everything I produce? You know, you can hear that in the community right now, can't you? You know, work for what? You know, so this is the common refrain that would happen under slavery. Again, we're talking about not what happened to us, but we're talking about what happened with white people, with Europeans. So there was also no incentive to develop the society at all, to develop the means of production, to develop the capacity to produce. Why do you have to come up with inventions and do this and that? All you got to do is take some more land, capture some more people, enslave them. And that was the way that you got more, not through, you know, invention, not through creativity or anything like that. But the people who you capture, like I said, they have no incentive to produce. And they would break the tools and stuff like that. They would escape, and they try to kill the slave master. Normal kinds of beings do. You understand? So and so slavery then was superseded by a new social reality that was characterized as feudalism. And under feudalism is something that happened in Europe, and it lasted for 1,000 years or so. And this is the Robin Hood era. This is where these mythological human beings came into existence, where majority of the people were trapped on the land anymore, as they had been previously, and they were able now to keep part of what it was that they created for themselves. They owned their tools, often, but the land that they lived on was owned by somebody else. It was owned by the landlords, by the nobility and stuff like that. And they were able to keep some of what they created, but the vast majority went to the landlords, went to the nobilities and things, etc. This is why Robin Hood robbed the rich to give to the poor, and the king was always overtaxing and stuff like this, because these people had no rights at all. They couldn't be sold, but there was the next closest thing to slavery, because if the land was sold, they went with the land. Domination by the nobility. The Catholic Church was a ruthless, more ruthless than most people can even imagine, dominated their existence, right? This happened in Europe. What I'm talking about now really happened in Europe. And for 1,000 years or so, Europeans lived under feudalism, where now you have this primary contradiction that exists between the nobility ability, the landlords, the landowners on the one side, and then on the other side, the peasants and the serfs who were tied to the land in this relationship that we just described. It happens. Cannot explain very well. We're looking at European society. The thing that happens is that we move from feudalism to what is called capitalism. You have new social forces coming into existence, social relations coming into existence. You have new relations of production coming into existence. Now you have a situation where a handful of people, own and control everything that's necessary to produce. A handful. And the majority of the people have to work for them in order to make a living. And now they're not tied to the land as they were tied before. They can go out and they're free to either go out and sell the value of their labor power to whomever they can or starve. That's freedom. You're free to work for the boss or starve, right? And this is the capitalist situation. So you have this relationship where the capitalist now that's born into this situation in Europe own and control the means of production. The capitalists, they're called the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie is French, isn't it, Penny? Yes. Yes, it is French. What does it mean?
It's the ruling class.
Yeah, but bourgeoisie, there's translation in French. That's what I was at.
Translation means city dwellers.
Okay. So you have the bourgeoisie, who is the capitalist class, the new ruling class that now owns and controls everything necessary to live and to produce life. And so not everything to produce life, but they try. I mean, when you talk to that part having to do with economic productivity, economic production, then the bourgeoisie owns and controls everything. Because producing life is about more than that, right? I know Yashika, you had them 5 young'uns. Producing life has to do with Al Green and other things like very white. But the point is that now the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, this new social force owns and controls what's necessary, the primary things necessary for reduction of life. And how does this happen is the question that we're looking at. This is where we're going now, because we're talking about now the arrival of capitalism. How does it happen? Well, Marx talks about something that's called the primitive accumulation of capital. He said that this is not as a consequence of capitalist production, right? It doesn't come because of capitalist production, this primitive accumulation, the accumulation of capital. He said, because you can't have capitalist production without an accumulation of capital. You got to have a lot of capital in order to produce, have capitalist production. That's what they call startup. You've heard that. You can't have capitalist enterprise. You got to have some startup money. So the primitive accumulation of capital is what Marx calls this startup. Capitalist production unless you have startup money. And so he says, well, how do we understand this? So if you can't have capitalist production without accumulation of capital to begin with, then we have to get out of this vicious circle by assuming that there was an accumulation of capital that was not a consequence of capitalist production, but a starting point. It's the starting point. So what is the starting point? He said it was turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. That the starting point of capitalism itself has its origin, its starting point in turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. Then he talked about how Europe engaged in war, England in particular, against China, that forced China to take opium in trade for tea, that made a war that said that China was going to take opium for tea. Part of how Europe began to get all of these resources that created capitalism. This is what Marx said. And he said that wage labor in Europe required as a pedestal, wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple. And he said that slavery, this primitive accumulation, was in political economy equivalent of original sin in theology. Starting point. If you want to know how it all got started, in the beginning, the garden and apple, and thereafter humans live in sin. He said, but the equivalence of this original sin in theology that you read about in the Bible is primitive accumulation of capital in political economy. This is how it all got started. This is the beginning of it. So slavery of African people, of other people's lands and territories by Europe, by white people, and that we stand on right now, that we're sitting in right now, is the beginning of the process that created capitalism in the world. From that point to capitalism, there is no other rational explanation for it than that. And Marx talks about this, but he then goes off on some other stuff that does not. This is what should be the study of political economy. Say that, then clearly, if you want to study political economy, this is your starting point. This question right here. So much of what we will read here does not use this as a reference point. The fact that white people including Marx was not able to say that I live in today, growing up in today, the society that created these universities and synagogues and churches that I attend today all around me, that this society has its beginning not in the genius of white people, but in the enslavement of African people and the theft of the land and resources of the vast majority of the people around the world. If you want to understand, because everything that we know about capitalism, even according to Marx, explain to us why, even in a capitalist society where, according to Marx, worse and worse for the workers, for the workers, but that hasn't been true in Europe and with white people in general. In fact, even in this crisis and problems, things are better and better for white people, for including the working class. But if you look at white people versus everybody else in the world, then you see everybody else in the world catching natural hell. We are the ones who are walking all across Africa trying to get on those damn boats across the Mediterranean to get into Europe where all of our resources are gone. We're the ones who are locked in these kinds of circumstances that we live in our communities, even as white people are all around. All white people, even the ones who stand under the bridges with a sign saying, "Feed me, I'm hungry," are better off as a part of being white than the ordinary African people are. That's the reality that we are confronted with. An ordinary bum under that goddamn with that cardboard sign saying, "Feed me, I'm hungry." If he's got a cell phone, it probably does, can dial 911 and say, "The niggas are trying to do something bad to me," and the police are going to show up. And not even asking any questions until they finish whipping your ass. Then that's when they'll say, "Okay, now tell the white guy, ask him what happened." You understand? That's the way it works in the world. That's the kind of world that we live in, but that's how it got shaped. And I think it's really important for us to understand, to get a better fix on the question of political economy than what's generally fed to us, either in our schools or even by Marxist texts like what we're reading. I understand that. So this is our starting point. So even as we talk about what John Eaton has to say, and because I do think there are certain rules and things that function once they created this monster, I think that there's certain things that's at work within it. I just think that, again, the starting point has to be this reality that I'm justifying. And I also think that it's the responsibility of African internationalists to continue to look at this and explore this, and to be able to show what real laws of development are based on this theft of our lands, our resources, our genius, our history, and everything else. I just think that's really important, because I'm sitting there, and it took everything in my power to be civil with this white woman, this stupid white woman, this stupid educated, asking these insulting, horribly insulting questions based on the premise of some superiority of white people. I mean, it was just and she's too stupid to even know that's what she was doing. Made me want to break a chair on her head. Even, I mean, all of her stupidity, because I'm not responsible for her stupidity, but for the fact that she's stupid, that she brags about, even if she doesn't do it, being a part of the most civilized, most advanced kind of society with all the education that's compared to black people and everybody else. And she's stupid. She's just, and she's blinded by her own whiteness and by her own sense of superiority that comes as a consequence of slavery and everything else. And even a thing that I would point out before talking about John Eaton's book is that when you look at Karl Marx and all he wrote, and he wrote an incredibly important work called Das Kapital, Capital, probably the second most read, let me see, the second most popular, the second most recognized book next to the Bible in human history at this point. But even as he was writing all of this stuff he was writing, he came from the aristocracy. He didn't come from a poor family, but he was poor himself. He lived sometimes in very desperate kinds of straits, not black people desperate. And I say black people desperate because I heard Yeshika tell this reporter yesterday about her children. She said, my children, she said, she took care of her children. She said, my children were white people spoiled. I never heard that before. I said, that's right, right on. So Marx wasn't black people poor, right? But but he was poor, right? And what kept him living well while he's doing all this writing and stuff, and Frederick Engels. And Frederick Engels was the son of the bourgeoisie. His daddy was a capitalist. His daddy was somebody who owned industry. He owned textile mills and stuff like that, where based on cotton. And the cotton production that we are talking about was done by African people who were enslaved. So, even as Karl Marx was writing all of this stuff, he was being fed by African people in Mississippi, picking cotton and other kinds of places. I just think it's really important for us to understand that, to get a full picture, to really understand political economy, because you cannot understand political economy simply by reading this. I understand it. I can read this, and it's helpful for me because it contextualizes the thought process of white people, but it also helps to understand the significance of a scientific approach to this, and we have to develop this science ourselves. Uhuru.
Can someone mute? We hear your children. Please mute. Unless
the child is actively involved in this study, which is cool, because child may have read this, because most people who are on this meeting have not read this. I want us to understand. I want us to understand the Marxist law of value through this process. I want us to understand simple commodity production, concepts like use value, exchange value, concepts like socially necessary labor, and concepts like abstract and concrete. And I want to start off by saying that when you talk about capitalism as something that represents the contest system, as something that represents the contest, workers and bosses, the laborers and the ruling class, then clearly the most exploited group of workers in human history has been African people. There's no group or an entire continent was transformed to a place for the production of people who would work for white people, to create value for white people. Built Europe, built every citadel, every church, everything that you see throughout Europe today and North America. African people built it, created it. You're talking about labor, you know. So that's where the fundamental working class is located in community, and that's all, which is one of the real politicians running for office. When you hear the presidential candidates talking, all of the politicians, they never say that this is for the working class. Who do they say it's for? The middle class. That's the middle class. And they liquidate because work is associated with blackness, and work, which creates all value in the world, comes through human beings laying our hands to nature. That's what production comes from. But slavery, the enslavement of African people, has made work into a horrible thing. You don't want to be associated with work. It's made labor something that is shameful. There was such a thing as referred to as nigger work. Black people are supposed to do, and then there was other work. They don't call it nigger work anymore. We just do that work. You know what I mean? There are places and situations you go to, only people, or the vast majority of people working there, are Africans. And I'm not only talking about, you know, I'm talking about other places too. When you look in there, it's Africans who are in there who are doing the work. So I also want to just read a little bit, if I may. Let me ask first, before going into this, if there's anything that anybody wanted to raise based on up to now. Goody. I mean, I'm satisfied with that if everybody else is. But yeah, okay. So here, chapter 2, commodity production. And here, teaser at the beginning of the chapter that says the commodity is the seed of capitalism. Commodities have the value, have use value, and products exchange value determined by average socially necessary labor time, abstract and concrete labor that's going to be dealt with here. Please mute, comrades, please mute. Prices and why they change, please mute, and its functions of circulation. I would like, please mute, comrades, because everybody please check and see if you're muted. Let's not unmute until we're going to talk. But we're having difficulties with
whoever just came on. It seems like the one that is doing that.
So please mute. Please check your phone, and see if you're muted, because somebody is providing a problem. Uhuru, comrades. Somebody is distorting the call. You must mute. Okay, it sounds like it's happened. No, it hasn't. Go ahead and mute from here. Can we mute from here?
Star 5.
All callers are muted and they can unmute themselves.
Okay, good. So I want to start reading. And three main features of guilt. I'm not going to, listen, it gets a little involved, this discussion. It gets a little involved. So what I want to do is hit on some of the main points here, but I do want people to read this. That there was a time I would not ask people to look at this stuff. Reading it without the access to African internationalism can be terribly misleading. We can go through this. So there are three main features give capitalism its essential character. These are as follows. One, wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few people who own the means of production, that is, raw materials, factories, machines, etc., as well as wealth in money form. So this is the capitalist class. Wide masses of the people have no means of getting a living except by selling their power to work for wages. This class of propertyless workers Marx calls the proletariat. Of course, there's no such thing as propertyless workers. I mean, in the white world, I mean, if you look at the situation where right now in this country, the white people have 22 times more wealth than Africans. This is a propertyless worker that we're talking about? Yes, Penny, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, because this says the three main
Yeah.
features to capitalism is essential character.
Yeah.
None of which
None of them which gives it. We're going to say that. I think it's really important because we've already talked about that. Three, production is not personal use of the producers, but for exchange market. Goods produced for exchange are termed commodities. Under capitalism, therefore, commodity production prevails. Production prevails. Everything that I've read here is essentially true about capitalism, but they're not. The main feature of capitalism is what? Parasitism. Parasitism. It's a damn parasite. It came into existence as this entity that attached itself to Africans and other people, and it continues to suck the resources. That's how all the wealth came to Europe in the first place. That's how capitalism got started, through the imperialists latching themselves onto Africa, African enslavement, the theft of this land right here, the theft of this land that we're on today, etc. New Zealand, Australia, Canada. There were no white people there normally and naturally, as there were no Africans who were here. Was this parasite that latched itself on and transformed Europe. We talked about how Europe went from this period of being feudal and then to capitalist. It transformed Europe. What transformed Europe was the fact that now all of a sudden white people got all this land. There was no such thing as white people. They lived under feudal domination, tied to the land that was owned by the landlords. And now for the first time in history, they can come here. They can have land. They can have homes. Not just have land. They got a lot of land. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, go to Europe and see how cramped and tight houses are in Paris. That's so grand and stuff. People, yeah, they eat cafe on the sidewalk because there ain't enough room inside. But anyway, you find all these other places. But here, going to here, even going to Africa, so they live better than they ever lived before when they were in Europe. New Zealand, Australia, all those places kill the inhabitants, or majority of them, and take the land, and then began to ship whole bunches of resources back to Europe. That's part of what changed Europe from feudalism into a capitalism. That's what created what we call the Industrial Revolution that transformed Europe and what have you. But even as it was transforming Europe, it was transforming the rest of us. Yet there were millions of indigenous people that they call Indians who were here when the white man got here. Millions who were wiped out like the buffalo. There were millions of African people who were killed during this whole trade in Africans, human trade in African people. And so now Africa is starving. It was rich, it was wealthy in all kinds of resources. This land, the indigenous people had all this land. This was their land, their buffalo, their resources. There's no evidence that they were starving, had these kinds of lifespan before the white man got here. So what you have is a situation where they take all these resources out and then they go to Europe, they transform Europe, bring down kings and queens. Why did the kings and queens go down? Why did they collapse? And they create this fantasy that the reason that Europe moved from monarchism to this democracy is because of some people wrote some nice books on democracy and things like that, and people just got tired and overthrew the nobility. No, 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 no. What happened was a whole crew of criminals were a new set of criminals coming into existence, where now, as before, the oppression that happened in Europe, the exploitation that happened among white people in Europe was by white people against white people. Now you have Europe going out of Europe, now attacking Africa, attacking this land that they call America's, taking all the kinds of resources here and then taking them back to Europe. And now the contradiction changes between white people, so that now you have a whole new crew of white people who coming into power. And in order for them to realize their ambitions and to realize what Marxists would call the development of social development, that old forms had to go. The nobility had to go. Feudalism had to go. And the people who were tied to the land in Europe have to be free to go and sell their labor power in the towns and the other places where you have the development of the towns. You have white people now who are needed to make ships and chains to put for Africans, and ships to sail the sea and loot other places and stuff like that. And then in order for that to happen in the best possible way, you see inventions happening. You have the Industrial Revolution to now make more irons more efficiently, to make more clothing that's needed, to clothe people who are going to be living in the towns, and who making ships and working to build houses for the people who are now freed from the land, not houses, but homes, places where they could live. All of this is what began to happen, throughout Europe, and it transformed Europe. And it brought down the kings and the queens. Yes, Penny, you about to say something? Yeah, all of the nobility, and a whole new situation is born.
So basically, is that the slave trade and the theft of land and resources liberated Europe, and it still sustains it?
Today, because the same structures, the structures didn't go away. The economic and political structures exist up until now. Africa is still trapped with France, and various other European powers, and even institutions like the IMF, which is a relatively new institution, but it just replaced the one that the British had before, replaced the ones that other white countries had before. All of these are institutions that facilitate, these are structures that continue to shift resources and wealth out of Africa. And one of the reasons they have problems in places like Afghanistan and the Middle East is because the people are trying to take back their stuff. And so there's an ongoing war against them so that they can keep hold of that. But the fact is that increasingly they're losing out. They're losing out to China, that was once on its knees. They were losing out to Venezuela. They're killing Venezuela right now. They're starving Venezuela, starving Venezuelan babies. Every place where there's resistance that's happening, that's what's caused the crisis that they're going through today. And that's what caused the crisis for them in this country as well, because Africans were not brought here to be any damn citizens or, anything like that. We were brought here to be used. We were brought here as commodities who could also think and work. That's what we were brought here for. And that has not changed in terms of what we are. Even the Constitution of the United States, when it declared that African people were 3/5 of human beings, this was as a measuring instrument that benefit one group of white people versus another group of white people, those who owned us. They wanted to be able to count those who were enslaved in order to have representation, like in the government. So they said, well, no, you can't. They ain't people, but we'll let them be a human person. They can count for 3/5 of a human being. Look at what happens today. African people are still instruments to be used one way or another. I mean, even this political contest that you're looking at today, even when they run for office, what is the black vote going to do? How's the black vote going to facilitate this group of white people versus that group of white people? That's what the question is all along. And so, yeah, I mean, the thing is that these structures continue to exist up to now, and it continues to sustain of white power. And the white power is being challenged. It's being challenged by China and other people, but these people who are now trying to be capitalists, they are capitalists themselves, which means they want to feed on the same carcass that the white powers, and sometimes they're pushing white people to the sideline while they are in the process of gobbling up what they can of African and African resources. And the African is the one that's least aware of what the hell is happening to us, least capable of defending ourselves against the stuff that's being done to us. Capable of thinking of having our own freedom, our own power, our own resource over our own lives, and therefore we're attaching ourselves to this group, that group, etc. And that's what distinguishes the African People's Socialist Party from the others. Anything else before we move it forward? So we see that these main features, they may be features, but they're not the features. Capitalism is parasitism, a system that came into being as a consequence of slavery and colonialism. That's what gave birth to it. This is the thing that terms and try to understand more effectively is that capitalism is a white thing. And so whatever you want to talk to it about science this and science that, the fact is that it is a thing that came into existence as the interests and aspirations of white. Capitalism is a white thing, and you will find many of the features of what might be characterized as European culture, the things that come from Europe are to be found there. They say capitalism is individualism, but that's a white thing. Who is the strongest, fiction? It's the silent loner. The silent loner is also how you characterize the damn masked serial killers too. You know what I mean? It's always by himself. Yeah, that sounds like John Wayne to me. You understand? It's the silent loner, Clint Eastwood, the silent, tough, lone guy. This is the thing that characterizes Europe. It's a feature of capitalism, but that's because capitalism is a feature of Europeanism. So these features of capitalism did not suddenly appear from nowhere. They developed within pre-capitalist society over a long period of time. I agree with that. But when they talk about pre-capitalist society, they're talking about white society. And most times they don't make any bones, but sometimes they treat white society as a universal thing, just like the reporter that we were talking about the other day. They treat white society as the norm with the assumption that all societies were like that. So over a long period of time, the two main antagonistic classes within capitalist society, the capitalist class and the proletariat, that's what they're talking about. Well, these features of capitalism did not suddenly appear from nowhere. They developed within pre-capitalist society over a long period of time. And it talks about how chapter 3 would deal with the coming into being of the two main antagonistic classes in capitalist society, the capitalist class and the proletariat. Because, see, here is not an absolute lie. The definition of capitalist society thing that just happens in Europe. But this is what you and I will talk about sometime later when we look at the question of dialectics, right? Which teaches us about the unity of opposites, right? And it teaches us about the relationships that everything has to something else. Once upon a time, white European societies that define themselves primarily in relation, right? Normans, you had the Celts, you had the, just different groups of, and most often were in competition with each other. And then you had this time where they discovered us and the resources that could come as a consequence of attacking us and other peoples around the world. And then they became closer. This, in my view, is what we call the emergence of the white nation itself, the European nation. When you have the emergence of this thing that called capitalism off of this, you saw this is what caused the erosion of feudalism. Feudalism was destroyed because Europe went and captured all of us, and then it destroyed feudalism and led to capitalism. A whole new thing. It's not just a European thing anymore. Now Europe has attached itself to Africa and the rest of the world. Capitalist society, you're not talking about European society. At one point, you could talk about feudal society, you just be talking about white people, white society. But at the moment Europe goes out and attaches itself to the rest of us, then capitalist society is born. And that's not white, except the white people do not recognize the fact that there's a total here, there's a new whole. It's not the same whole that used to exist when under feudalism, when white people were just dealing with each other. Now they've connected themselves to us, that there's a whole new manifestation on that. There's a whole new thing. So that's why the bass aquas, I mean, some truth simply ignore what they ignore. That their whole reality has been changed. And the inability of Europe to recognize that it owes its existence not to its own genius, but to what it has stolen from Africa and from other people. That's a certain kind of arrogance of whiteness that blinds it, so that it cannot even see the world based on the assumptions of its superiority over everybody else. That's why they would even tell a lie, say how when the reality is that it's the slaves who fed the slave master. The master would have been a starving, just an ordinary white guy trying to eke out a living like other white people did before they met us, right? And they didn't do a good job of that stuff before they met us. But it's those of us who've been in captivity who fed them. But we lose our own sense of confidence because we think we can't make it without the white man. It's the white man who can't make it without us. And that's the reality that we're deal with. And the white man knows he can't mix it with us. That's why there's a police on every block in our community. That's why armed forces all around the world, because they can't make it without that relationship. And that's the secret to their defeat and our victory. Uhuru. Yeah. What's that? Okay. Yeah, I'm just because my eyes.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
Is that partly why the education, I guess, system is the way that it is? Because this relationship is taught in a certain way to let people know that, I guess, the way to overturn it is that the system rests on our back. So the way that we're not taught this information. We're just taught from, I guess, a European point of view. So we only think that the only way to survive is through these means. Well,
of course, it teaches that, but that's part of what we've talked about, like in other studies, that when you have a society, what you will find is that a society is comprised of an economic base, as I say, how the society itself produces, procures what it needs to live and survive, right? How it produces what it needs. And then stemming from that is what we call a superstructure. And the superstructure is the culture, the economic institutions, even the political, even the religions, the ideological expressions of this relationship. So you will never find a slave society that teaches freedom, freedom for those who are enslaved. A slave will never go to slave master school and learn how to be free. Never, never, never. A colonial subject will never go to a colonizer school and learn how to be free. Learn is how to be better. My daddy you know, a long time ago, because I was a quote unquote good student, educated fool. And you know, and he was right, because I must have been 60 before I understood what the hell he was talking about. My dad had a second grade education, right? Which is lucky, fortunate for him, you know, in so many ways, you know. So yeah, the schools will teach it. It's not even that the teachers don't even have to get together. The institutions don't have to say, look, let's teach black people how to be stupid. They don't have to do that. It's just a normal reflection of the economic base that makes that happen. And so what does an education do? It teaches you how to be productive. You to have too much education, because you ain't gonna be productive, but in such a limited way. Your ass not going but that far. They let a few of you get there who they might need, all kinds of reasons, but the majority won't get there. And the other thing it does is the educational system reproduces the ideology. So the better you are, my daddy said, the bigger fool you are as an African. You know what I mean? That's the thing. And the majority of the Africans don't get it through there. It's very difficult for the majority of the Africans to get through the school process. And majority of the Africans, because it's instinctively, it's, you know, students may not even know why they hate it so much, but it's instinctive, because it doesn't have to direct. They don't say, they say Rome was everything, Queen Mary was everything, all this stuff. So by default, they're defining you without even calling your name, right? But they define you by default. It works. That's how your school gonna work. Uplift the Africans and tell our story. We become now the subjects. We become the subjects of history. That's critical. That's what that white woman couldn't understand who was interviewing you, who I wanted to hit. Okay. But as I told her that, because if we weren't, every white person we met would be dead. You understand? I mean, you're talking about a good people. And I know she's going to make a big thing of that. I said, damn, why did I say that to that woman? And that's not her story. She's got a story now. She didn't have one before. So we say that important, though, here we deal with the development of commodity production, which had its origin within primitive communist society, its disintegration. And social change in the ancient world, no small part in the disintegration of what happened with feudal society. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go to the library this way, but you will see, you can read evidence of what happened to feudal society. The reason Maria Antoinette lost her head, you understand, was not because of some sudden democratic impulse that developed in France. In fact, what we're calling democracy in France was democracy for a certain social force that was becoming rich and powerful because of what? Because of French slavery. Because French was selling and all kinds of resources from African labor. Okay, it says that where commodity production prevailed, man lost control of it and was placed at the mercy of blind economic forces. That Engels said that in the first transformation of products into commodities lay the root of the entire revolution that followed. Capitalism is the culminating stage in the rule of the commodity. You see, but what was the first commodity? Africans. Yeah, we were the damn commodity. We were thinking, working commodities. And I don't mean this, you know, like, how do you put it? I don't mean this in something that we were synonymous to that. We were that. We were commodities, bread for sale. That's what we talked about when we talked how slave breeding happened in this country. And the thing is that we teach what they can't teach. We talk about George Washington crossing the Delaware, you know, in the cold weather, this kind of stuff, and they make up these kind of stories. The guy who rode the British are coming, and what have you. Story of them marching hundreds and thousands of African men, women, and children with 30 pounds of weight, chains around our necks, and women with ropes around their necks, sometimes pregnant. The children being sold on the spot by anybody who wanted to, they can't teach that. They will never teach that. That is the criticism of the whole goddamn social system that only we can make that criticism, you know, and that's what I just said was a nice description of what has happened in the relationship. If they said that, they would never be able, that white man who is the sheriff, that statement about Yeshika and those children, never be able to make that statement. We have a responsibility to arm our community with this kind of understanding so that they won't feel on the defensive. She was turning her life around, and she was going to do all of this and all of that. Yeah, she was learning how to lock and load. She could take a gun apart and put it back together with blindfolds. This is the kind of stuff that, you know, I mean, all this stuff that she was turning her life around. She was going to be a good girl now. What the hell are you talking? Is that possible? How can you to say that she was going to be a good slave? Is that what you're actually having to say? She was going to be a good slave. She's going to do everything we do, you know? No, we don't buy that anymore. We don't buy that. We don't accept those kinds of definitions. So, simple commodity production. Goods for exchange stands in contrast to production for use. For example, by the tribe, household, estate, them. Because people have produced, you know, forever. I mean, that's what, you can't live without producing what you need. And the group, the tribe, the community, in producing what we need. That's always been going on. Explain goods produced for exchange are called commodities. Production arises from the division of labor, fosters and is fostered by the division of society into classes. We say commodity production arises from the division of labor and both fosters and is fostered by the division of society into classes. That is splitting into classes contributes to commodity production. And from what we know, and we don't know everything. I mean, much of our own information. That's why, you know, like a lot of stuff you hear that people are discovering this in the Middle East and goes back to then and that. No, the Jewish state has that. The Jewish state has that. And they have a story that they have to tell that confirms a lie, that somehow the white people who are there now have been there forever, et cetera, et cetera. They can't show Africans' influence. They can't show any of that. The Jewish state, the white people who control the Jewish state are the ones who have possession of all those resources, all of the archaeological and other evidence that's come from those places, and other white have them as well. And they interpret them the way they want to. I was in San Francisco at the museum there, and in that museum they had this traveling heads from the Olmec. The Olmecs they're called Olmec, but that's not their real names. But they've discovered in Mexico and parts of Central America heads. they weigh tons and tons. And they were in these places where that were far removed from the areas where the stone that was necessary to make them came from. They don't know how the hell they moved them there. It starts with the U, I think. Huge. That's a term that means great, grand, colossal. They call them colossals. They were so huge. About the heads is they look like every black person. I mean, it blows your mind, right? And so when they were first discovered, white people, because they were there like 2,000 years before Jesus was born, right? So they say, well, they said, no, they're not black. No, literally, this is a huge debate. They said because when they were created, was that were too they couldn't, define them, like that. And then the other explanation was, well, they were just there for a long time, and the wind and stuff, the elements just changed their features, all of them. So any difference? I mean, I'm in the museum in San Francisco, and the white people just walking around with notebooks. And does anybody? I say, that Negro, they're from Detroit. What the hell do you mean? They're acting like there's some mystery about this. I'm looking right at him. You understand? So even with the evidence staring you right in the face, logical underpinning inferiority of African people, and you cannot explain how the hell 2,000 years before Christ, before Jesus, and the Africans, the Mexicans, when they're honest, when I used to go through there, guys in Mexico, they would say, you ask them about the Olmec, they said, that's the mother culture. That's the original culture. So we were here long time ago, before white people even, there's oceans and things like that. We were here. But, they write a history based on their needs. Everybody does. It's not just them. History, nor any science. None of the science is some innocent stuff that's free from the subjective factors, as they would like for us to believe. Because you don't come to a scientific solution unless you're trying to solve a problem you're trying to solve. And the problem you're trying to solve usually is a social contradiction, something that arises in that looking for solutions. Every society, every group that will try to solve a problem will do that with that in mind. And the point is that Africans have the best vantage point of seeing the whole world, not because we special like that, but because our relationship to the world, to history as it has, especially but not only since the advent of capitalism itself. Anyway, so we talked about simple commodity production, producing stuff, and we exchanging it. It's probably happening in communities where we live. I mean, people can think of it, well, I got a little of this, I produced this, you people exchange. That's simple commodity production. So we say that for many centuries, commodity production existed alongside production for use. And the main source of supply, and was supplemented only to a minor degree by the exchange of commodities. So for a long time, this was the main thing. So we produced something because, it was something that, we had to have in order, for clothing, we need this, and we produce it for that. Or a substantial part of the commodities entering into exchange consisted of products, slave labor, belonging to the slave owners. But from the earliest times, modern times, independent peasant producers and craftsmen have played an important part in the production of goods for exchange. though the methods of production to other types of production and the relative importance of the independent producers have varied very much at different times and at different places. So this, they're talking about here is what existed among white people. That they call this a mode of production. A man, again, we talked about the Marxist theory of the development of human society and mode of production. One was, the mode was what they call primitive communism or primitive communalism, then slavery as a mode of production, feudalism as a mode of production, then capitalism, and from capitalism, according to Marx, would be exchange of goods by small independent producers who own their means of production is called simple commodity production. So they own their means of production. So own to make, the hat or the shoes or what have you, simple commodity production. Commodity, the seed of capitalism. The wealth, write Marx in the opening words of Capital, of those societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails, presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities. Its unit being a single commodity. Must therefore begin with the analysis of a commodity. And these are words that he uses, and it means one thing, but we know where the commodities come from. Use value. In order that goods may be exchanged, they must be used, they must be useful to somebody. Human wants. Be used for any purpose obviously cannot be exchanged for a useful article. This characteristic of usefulness, that is satisfaction of human wants, use value, therefore must have use value. Clear. Okay, I'm going to move ahead a little. On page 17, commodities are products of labor on the bottom. Use value, however, is not in itself enough to make a thing a commodity. Fresh water from a spring, the rays of the sun, all satisfy human wants, but they are not commodities. Commodities are goods produced for exchange, and increasingly you cannot say that about water. You can't even say it by air. Mexico, produce here means produce for the by expenditure. All the goods that are bought and sold on the market, with a few exceptions that prove the rule, such as land, are the products of labor. Of the hunter insofar as he must trap the animal and prepare the skin. Metals are the products of the miner who mines and of the craftsman who refines the metal. Therefore, political economy refers to the expenditure of human labor on materials existing in nature. Man transforms the product of nature to serve his human needs. The work of changing the form, he is constantly helped by material forces. You can even say that about water. When, going to get the spring water and bottling it and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, if it's possible to commodify it, we'll commodify, so commodities are the products of labor. How labor of labor are distributed matters of central importance in economic science, down to exchange values. Commodities then are goods possessing use value, produced by human labor and for exchange. Because some people call everything a commodity, like a product, but a commodity is defined as something that is produced for the purpose of selling it, for the market, more or less, for exchange, for selling it. In exchange, commodities have certain quantitative relations. For example, hunters who in early times traded furs for iron or cloth would expect to receive certain definite quantities of iron or cloth in return for a given quantity of furs. Might be exchangeable for 3 pounds of iron or 30 yards of cloth, or have a value which is quite distinct and different from their use value. Value in exchange value. Use value depends on the qualities and properties of a commodity. The shaft of a spear, wood must have certain qualities. It must have strength to stand up to shocks and be shaped long and thin so that it can be easily held and thrown. In order to be exchangeable, commodities must satisfy a human need, possess use value, but the value that they have in exchange, a different kind from use value. So a thing has value because it's useful, right? It's a use value, but the exchange value, because something is useful, doesn't say the same thing, doesn't tell you what its exchange value is. Whereas use value is qualitative, that is, depends on the qualities, the shape, the size, etc. of the commodity. Exchange value is quantitative. Use value cannot, as is explained below, be quantitatively measured, since the use value depends on the satisfaction of the subjective wants of individual men. Right? Its use values depend based on satisfying, your wants, right? That's its use value. Okay. But exchange value is altogether different from use value. A product which may remain identical in use may at one time command one value in exchange and another time another value. Moreover, the value in exchange may be measured. For example, it may be found that 10 sealskins equal 5 pounds of iron. 10 sealskins equal 30 yards of cloth. What determines these qualitative exchange relations? Term exchange value. What is it that makes the difference? What's the exchange value? How does that come about? Okay, use value, right? Exchange value, right? So we say that the exchange value is determined by labor. This is going to be, and because what doesn't get factored into the labor in the capitalist society, and the value that's already been extracted from African and from others. For example, an automobile worker would make a certain amount of money of what that automobile worker produces at the point of production. Based on that, this is the amount of money that you make. But the thing is that that's off. The reason it's off is because before that product got to that factory in Detroit to make the automobiles, somebody in Guyana, somebody in Sierra Leone, bauxite out of the earth, who we don't even measure. This bauxite came out of the earth that made the aluminum that went into the car, or the iron that went into the car frame also came out of a mine in Sierra Leone. That doesn't even get factored into happens at the point of production. That's why I'm saying that it's off. And so you have white people who paid a certain amount. And I say white people in this instance because when you look at capitalist production inside the United States, maybe unionized and may have made a little money here and there. But for the most part, when you're talking about somebody having a good job, etc., you're talking about white people. That becomes the template. That's the measurement. People make a certain amount of money. It doesn't meet the standards of capitalist measurements of value created through production. And it doesn't meet those standards because the white person worker is being paid from resources that's coming from that mine in Guyana or working in Sierra Leone, bringing up bauxite and other kinds of resources that goes into that product. So the white worker in America, in England, in all of these other places who get all of this money, they live well. Look at France. Now, France is in a big struggle right now because the workers are not getting what they are accustomed to get. Not only do they get a lot of money, they can't even be fired in France. They're in a big battle now because the workers, the bosses want the right to change the law so that they can fire the workers. Because the unions are so powerful there that they can't even fire a worker. You got a situation where they have, like 30 days vacation. They have, some places they got like 4 months off for pregnancy. The woman gets 4 months, and sometimes the man gets 3 or 4 months off for pregnancy too. Like he had the damn baby, right? But where does all that resource come from? And this is the question. This is what keeps the society stable most of the time and united, because so they can extract all this value. It's we who are dying as a consequence. Nobody's paying attention to all of the babies that Obama's murdering in Venezuela now in order to protect this relationship. Obama's killing babies all over Venezuela, all over Syria, all these babies and people and all over Africa being killed to maintain this stable European society. And the less successful they are in maintaining control of the rest of the world, the less stable Europe is, the less stable America is. So you see, I mean, if you want to know why in America, all of a sudden governments, and in Europe, governments are talking about same-sex marriage. They're talking about things like women in the military and all this stuff. It ain't because they certainly started loving same gender loving people or women. No. They're trying to unite the whole damn white nation in this struggle that increasingly they're becoming conscious of having to make with the rest of us around the world. That's why our unity is so critical, and the unity of the African nation is such a critical thing too. That's why we have the struggle with most people when they start talking about these elections and stuff. I want to do some more with this, but this is okay. Let me where were we? Can somebody tell me? By labor, exchange value is determined by labor. Okay, so and yeah, I was challenging. I mean, there's truth to it, but you have to dig in to get the truth, and we have to learn how to measure that truth, and we have to be able to determine what laws are really at work here. Because like for example, there has come this term that's being used by Marxists, and I think Lenin may be one of the early persons who used the term of defining what happens to Africans and other people around the world as super exploitation. They say we are super exploited, right? Because all of the resources that comes from us, but I don't think that's super exploited. When you say something is super exploited, you mean that's an extraordinary thing, right? The super thing is not ordinary, that's an extraordinary thing. But if all the people in Africa, if all the people in the Americas, if all the people in Asia, or most of them, are exploited like this, then you can't call that super exploited. That's ordinary exploitation. What is super is what white people are getting. Do you understand what I'm saying? The so-called exploitation that happened to the white worker. The white worker in France, who I'm just talking about now, cannot even be fired. They're about to have battles in the streets of France right now because they got to try to change the law so they can fire workers, right? All of the benefits that they get, etc. That is the super relationship that somebody has to capitalism. The relationship that we have with capitalism is the starting thing. It's the original sin. It's the fact that ours is the real relationship. There's nothing super about that. What's super is what's happening with white people. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. I've talked too much, and we don't have that much time. I would like to, shucks. Is there anything anybody wants to let's open it up right now, even if we have to steal a couple of minutes. I want to talk about this. There's so much more that could have and should be. I hope people will read this and read it and be able to read it. I want to just say this about money, because money has become this thing that is that represents a certain value. For example, we talked about how at one time people who had different things, they commodities or they produce different things, they would hook up. You know, you got a cow, you bring your cow to the market and say, well, this cow is equal to that many chickens, or this much cloth, or this much iron, or some kind of metal, and then that's how you do the stuff. But if you got a cow and you go to the market and you can't find what you want at the market at the time, but you can't hold on to the cow forever. I mean, so what do? And also, every time you go to the market, you got to take the damn cow with you. You know what I mean? That's a hell of a thing to be peddling, walking around. Well, I don't like what's here in this market. Let me go down to this. You got to take the cow with you and stuff like that. It becomes complicated. And people having to do that. So what happens is that over a period of time, they create something that could hold the value that was not the cow, but the value of the cow could be stored in here. Not only could you store the value of the cow in here, it's something you can hold on, to. It's something that you can measure. But for example, you go to the market, you got a damn cow, and somebody might want to exchange something, and they ain't got a cow's worth. You know what I mean? They might, go ahead, Deshun.
Also, the invention of debt, where debt will come out of this idea of what money would be. Where does debt come from? We'll play into this whole idea.
Yeah, we will be getting to the ability to start talking about debt, but it is a relationship to it. Debt is related to that, because debt also becomes a way of storing value. You understand? Store the value, and so you don't have what you need, and also if you got a cow and it's equal to X numbers of X amount of iron or this, and you might not just want all iron, you got to have something that you can measure, and definitively, and say, okay, I've got this piece of gold, this piece of corn that is an ox, should bring few chickens, could bring this or that, etc. So I don't want to I can't get it all right now. So I take it, and I have, with the coins, you can measure it, and then what you have left is equal now, not to that much, but to a minimum, lesser amount that you can use for something else. It becomes much easier to handle than it is going to the market with the cow. And in fact, it leads to all kinds of problems after a period of time, because you store the value, you have value that you use, that you get from something, then the value used to buy something. Somebody might not want to buy anything, so they store the value. And that means that money is off the market. It's not being circulated and what have you. You can see over a period of time the implications you could have with a whole bunch of people who have these resources now that they would be buying from the market, but they hold it off. And so money becomes like a really important thing. And at a certain point, you don't have, just like at one point, silver and stuff like that. And it had the same use value because it took a certain amount of time, just like determined by the socially necessary amount of time it takes to produce something. That time thing is the common element that's involved in all production. So if you go to the place and you have to the market and you have iron, or even if you have an oxen or something like that, it took a certain amount of time to produce that oxen. Everything that went into it, the food that you had to do, all of that factored into that. So over a period of time, when people are trading, they begin to figure out that since this took me this amount of time to produce this is the only common factor. I mean, how do you measure an ox, right? You know, by some lead or by some iron or by, you know, X numbers of spears, etc. Because these are different kind of things. But how do you, what is the constant? The constant is the kind of time it took to create all of them. So you're not gonna give somebody an oxen that may have taken you, you know, several months or a couple of years and what have you in time for something that somebody could produce in a matter of a week or so. That's not equal. That doesn't work out. Nope, you can't get this, buddy, not for this, right? And so because people, you know, so what happens over a period of time is that I was trying to get to with this discussion, but this is the common factor that runs through all production that it took to produce that. Now, you take gold. Now, gold is everywhere, as quiet as kept. It's not just because gold is rare, but the time it takes to get that gold, to refine that gold, to turn it into the coin, and X amount in terms of weight, etc., for that piece of gold is now the equivalent of how many oxen, how many this and that it took. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the thing that runs through the common element that runs into it. If you're going to buy a cow, a spear, iron, or what have you, you can measure it by the amount of time that it took to make get this gold coin, this silver coin. This is what becomes like a factor. And then at some point, what happens is that if you continue to hold gold, if you continue to travel and use silver, you wear it out. It's not weighing the same anymore. You understand? So then something that is even a substitute for the gold and the silver comes into being. And like, could be, sometimes they would take the gold and they would put an, what do you call it, an alloy into it. So they would mix the gold with copper. And you've heard, that's what the copper penny, in fact, that's why they call the pigs the cops, you know, because of, that's the copper in there, something. But anyway, let me not divert. But the point is that, yes. Okay. So all of this factors into the process. You got this substitute now, this paper. Now, it doesn't matter if it wears out. It's got the stamp of the government and stuff that backs it and what have you. This provides a problem too, like inflation, and you got too much paper out there, then and especially when you got a situation where there's nothing backing it up except bombs and guns. Like in this country, it's what they call fiat currency. It's not based on the fact that it has any value. It's based on the fact that the government says this is what it's valued at, and you got enough guns to back it up. Unlike in Sierra Leone, for example, where you can literally become a millionaire. If you go to Sierra Leone and you got $100 and you exchange it for Sierra Leone currency, you get more than 1 million leones, I mean, and because the currency has not that much value, and because they ain't got that many guns, among other things. I mean, there's much resources extorted. So how in the hell can the money in Sierra Leone, where they got all the natural resources, metals and stuff like that, be worth nothing, where in the place where there ain't none, it's worth everything. You can get all of this, for us. Yeah, we have some questions and comments in Facebook. Yeah.
Roy Miller from Facebook is asking, how can we build industry with the systems in place now?
Join the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement. We have Black Star Industries that does that. But the way we do it is the same way that countries fighting for independence do it. We see it as contending with the colonial imperialist economy. Ours is not an attempt to join with that economy, even though we have to do what we're doing in the context of the existing social system. Just like we build revolutionary parties, not to join the Democrats or Republicans, but our objective is to take power and to put in place right now the kinds of economic foundation that will allow us to function as an independent nation of people. Uhuru.
Tavares Lucas how do you feel about investing in Detroit while it's cheap and using the already established industrial facility to build an economic stronghold?
I mean, I think it's cool if we can find a way, and if it makes sense. Of course, what we would have to rely on, I don't call it investing. I mean, yeah, I can invest in our future. If we could find uh, a reliable way to get land, property, and even if there's viable existing technological resources in Detroit, I think we would try to take that. There's no problem there. I mean, with that at all. If that were possible, I would like to see us do that. In fact, years ago, the sanitation workers in this city went on strike. They were all Africans. That's what you call a garbage man was. That's what I'm talking about, nigger work. The garbage man, they were all Africans. And they went on strike for better wages and conditions and what have you. And when they went on strike, the city hired scabs, white scabs out of Tennessee to come drive the trucks. And the problem was that the scabs didn't know how to run trucks. They were wrecking trucks right and left. And so I'm struggling with these brothers, damn, going back to work for the city. Let's take the money that people are sending and buy some trucks. You understand? And let's run out and create our own enterprise for the community, et cetera. Of course, they couldn't hear that. But, and, you know, probably it unreasonable kind of thing too. I mean, it would take a lot of resources to have done that, but that would have been my solution. And I do believe the independent economic capacity is tremendously important. When you go to Africa, anytime anybody here has ever driven on the interstate or highways, and sometimes you see on the side of the highways, you know, like a lot of like tractors and, you know, trucks are just sitting there. I mean, I'm sure they're for sale and things like that. But if you go to Africa, if you've ever been to Africa and you go to a community, there are no tractors. You know, I mean, people are tilling by hand. People are doing everything by hand. I just think what difference it would make to just have 2 or 3 tractors in a community, in most of the communities I've gone to in Africa. So I believe that if we can get our hands on that technology, and of course we will at some juncture, because after this revolution, our objective is to take back to Africa every damn thing that was taken from Africa. And so, because we're not talking about starting all over or anything like that, you know, it means that we've already created damn tractors here. Why would you have to go home and create them again? So, yeah, I'm united with that concept. Was there somebody else? Is there anybody else before we shut it down? Well, you can unmute yourself or we can unmute it, I guess, here. Star five, star 5, star 5.
Star 5.
All callers are muted. All callers are unmuted.
Is there anything from anybody? Penny, I know before we came into this study that you had a lot of issues and you might want to raise some of that.
Chairman, thank you for this study. It's really profound and really helpful. I mean, it just strikes me that if it says exchange value determined by labor, in other words, the price or the cost of something, then if that were really true, African people would be really wealthy and white people would be desperately poor, because the majority of all the labor in the world since, you know, in the last 600 or 700 years was stolen and forced in Africa by Africans, and also the what do you call them, the basic resources needed to make something were stolen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the basis of reparations right there, that labor value has never been paid.
It's never, well, of course
The
not.
real cost
Yeah.
of something is totally false.
Of course.
Something that costs $5 should cost like $1,000.
Yeah.
Because all of the labor that was stolen to make it so that white people's labor could be paid.
In addition to that, if you would look, I've read in the not too distant past how economists would say that what Europe takes from Africa really is of little value. I mean, when they look at it, say it's of little value. But here's what you have. It's a thief stealing something and then having the power to see value of what he stole is, right? But that didn't have any value. I mean, it's like the thief, and the thief, the ones who takes that is the one who sets the terms of the value. So this is what is valuable. And so we spending all our time, and it's not really even worth anything. Commonly and ordinarily say,
All callers are muted and they can unmute themselves.
you're right that not only the labor has not been paid. Important about that is the creation of a whole different entity with the when once you pull Europe, and Europe is now attached to the rest of the world, then everything is determined differently, because the explanation that a Marxist would give you for the difference in the amount of value given to an African, say, than a worker in Stockholm or in the United States, is that the more efficient the production is, like even workers who are producing the same things, if one is inefficient in producing, that what determines value is not just time, but the socially necessary time, the normal time, the time that's so if everybody in the society is producing something, and it takes a certain amount of time, generally speaking, but this guy over here is taking 2 times as much time. That person won't get paid twice as much. The value won't be twice as much. In fact, that person is going to lose out. He's going to have to go into fishing or farming or something else, because what happens is that people would buy from the more efficient, do that in a more expeditious time. But if you consider that we're not just talking about Europe anymore, but Europe has now become a part of and defining part of a huge new global society, if you will, then it changes the equations terribly. And I think that's something that we could look at. But certainly, the stolen value of labor, of African labor, is a fundamental aspect of the demand for reparations. And that's why all these people call themselves socialists. This is what a socialist understands. A socialist understands this in theory. Even a Marxist understands this concept in theory. But you would have somebody like Bernie Sanders, who's going to give you $15 an hour. He's a socialist. Well, hell, when we produce every damn thing, you'll give me $15. What you're trying to do is bribe me to keep me from taking the whole damn thing. That's what it is. It's a form of bribery. Anything else, comrades? Yes. Wait, let's see. Anything else? Anybody else? And you have to unmute yourself by doing star.
All callers are unmuted.
Anybody else? We're going to stop it momentarily.
Hey, Chairman.
Yes, who is this? Yes, Jordan. Uhudu.
Well, I hope we can, maybe a follow-up for this, because I know we didn't get through it all, but just kind of like about like, the superstructure and the education system and these institutions as being part of the superstructure. Like when you study world history in like high school, they have to talk about, what you mentioned about, Greece and Rome and, the different Chinese, emperor being time and such. And also even,
If people are not, if you're not talking, comrades, on in this meeting, please mute. Let Jordan go ahead and make a statement. Go ahead, Jordan.
So you learn about these different empires and the things that they've done that have been horrible, whatever. But that almost comes like they almost present in such a way that that's just a part of human history that this is just what humans do to each other.
Yeah.
There's always we've there's always been conflict. There's always been people trying to take over control or bring in other people. And so then it becomes like almost a way of excusing the behavior of the U.S. or kind of, just really confusing, our relationship. We're not kind of like overlooking our relationship.
Yeah.
Between, the U.S. government and African people. And, speak to that a little bit about, like that comes up in some conversations that I have with people, who just say this is just human behavior.
Yeah. Well, let me just say that every thief thinks everybody else is a thief. I don't know if you've ever run into that, but one of the least trustworthy persons in the world that you'll find is a thief. Thief locks everything up and makes the assumption that everybody else is a thief, and that's part of the reason. But the other thing is this: brag about being slave owners and slave holders. They used to brag about empire, not because everybody was doing it, because we do it. And this is the thing that makes us significant: that we own slaves, that we own people, that we took countries, etc. And it is a way that Europeans are now on the defensive, and they are trying to explain their behavior as human behavior, as opposed to European behavior, as opposed to capitalist behavior. Is humans. All humans have done this, do this, etc. And while it is true that you will find acts of aggression throughout human society, and certainly throughout European society, even Europeans doing horrible things to each other, you can find that. There's nothing, you will not find in history anything that looks like what Europe has done to Africa. I want to say this quite explicitly: to Africa and to what Europe has done to the indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. Find me a place in history where whole peoples have been literally wiped out or nearly wiped out, where an entire continent has been it's not like they went to Tampa and put everybody in slavery in Tampa, Florida. It's the whole damn continent of Africa that was transformed into this. And not only that, where everybody born of all the children of the mother who was enslaved would also be kept in slavery forever. Where this went on for hundreds of years like that. Tell me, have them show you something like that in history. Have them show you that in history. And of course they cannot do it. And it's like you said, it's at a time they used to brag about it. There's a museum in France, in Paris, that used to be called the Museum of the Colonial Museum of the Colonizers, something like that. And outside on this museum, what do you call it? Bas relief? What do you say? Bas relief.
All callers are muted and they can unmute.
There's a museum there where they actually have in the walls of the museum showing Africans and other people traveling from their homes, enslaved and in chains, bringing all these resources to this big fat top thing. And this woman is France. And all these other people are bringing these resources. They used to brag about it, but now, because of peoples around the world are resisting and going, they've changed the name of the museum. It's not the Museum of the Colonists anymore. It's some kind of Occidental. How do they call it now? Do you know the name of it? Some Occidental, some other kind of museum. Because now it's uncomfortable to be that, because everybody. It's because of what Yashika said. That what happens in the dark will come to light. The world can see it, and we're coming. And that's what's happening. They see everybody coming, and they say, well, everybody did it. Everybody does it. It's not just me. You did it too, etc. You sold your own people, they say, Yeah. All right, comrades, this has been a long one. I've got to do. And is it Gaida who's making the announcement? If so, you'll have to take it off mute.
All callers are unmuted.
Go over that quickly, make sure that everybody, if your name wasn't called, then you should do this. Make